Litigation has begun with FSU challenging the ACC Grant of Rights.
College football realignment and expansion is always in the news, so we're back on the Big Mountain, where we bring you a detailed focus on the Big Ten, the Mountain West, and all of the realignment talk.
Oh, Steve, it is Wally World out there.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my Wally World shirt.
It's
crazy out there right now. I mean, human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria, and of course I'm talking about FSU.
Yeah, and all this goes down the Friday right before Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we have nothing better to do right now. We want to do a podcast about FSU and the craziness that's ensuing. And, I just got to say, it looks like the Pac-12 craziness is coming to somewhat of an end. And just in time for that to end, I said, what are we going to talk about? And you texted me right back, FSU's just heating up. And here we go, right into the FSU debacle.
And I think we kind of saw this coming because we've been talking about that all year. We're saying, the Pac-12, this is going on. And we said right about the time this is going to cool off and settle, the ACC is going to start ramping up.
So let's get into it, Steve. Okay. We want to do an episode here that's looking at Florida State University and what they're doing to try and get out of or move forward and move away from the ACC and specifically the Grant of Rights. So Friday, we learned that there was a filing in Florida. Mm-hmm. The Board of Trustees met and they approved this filing that is challenging the legitimacy of the ACC Grant of Rights. So that's kind of the headline. I want you to take us through some of the details.
Yeah, so first of all, like you said, Friday, I think it was at 10 a.m., the Board of Trustees met. I was wrapping up my work week, had a half day, was pretty much done with everything, and I was listening with one ear to this meeting.
Yeah.
It was very succinct, very straightforward. Talking about the reasons why they need to get out of the ACC.
Yeah.
And before they can really look at getting out of the ACC, due to there's these crazy costs they need to overcome, which is caused by the ACC's Grant of Rights. Mm-hmm. So they broke down the legal arguments, the burden on Florida State, and the board basically moved forward and directed their attorney, their solicitor, to move forward with that lawsuit to challenge. So which they did the same day. It was filed in the Circuit Court of the Second Judicial Circuit in Leon County, Florida. I believe Leon County is very near Tallahassee.
Okay.
So the friendly court, just like we talked about back in when we were talking about the Pac-12, Washington State filing in a friendly court near them. This is an age-old legal strategy. Everybody does it. It's very smart. If you didn't do this, you'd be an idiot. And obviously, their lawyers are smart, so they filed in Leon County, Florida, trying to get a friendly court. And the thing with this, so they're not now. One thing that's really a lot different than the PAC. In the PAC, you had that immediacy. You had that threaten. You had that potential of harm of some of the parties, whatever. Yeah. So they sought the temporary restraining order and the preliminary injunction. In this case, what Florida State is doing is they are just going through the full lawsuit process. They are not asking for a preliminary injunction or any of that kind of stuff. And what they are challenging is the legitimacy of the ACC's Grant of Rights to ESPN. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some different, and I think we're going to get to that a little bit later, but there are some different, whether that goes to 2027, whether it goes to 2036 or whatever. But either way, they're challenging just the legitimacy in general of the Grant of Rights and the term of and how far it goes out.
Well, and let me just say, this is kind of, while they're both around the same topic, schools leaving their conference.
Yes.
This is done more, shall I say, correctly, compared to the departing 10 of the Pac-12 that just said, hey, we're out of here. Right. And then they had to try to figure things out afterwards, and we're going to get another episode out in terms of that settlement that they supposedly are agreeing to. So I'll give FSU some credit here in that they're trying to go through it maybe the right way, if there is a right way, and not, hey, we're leaving and we'll do this after the fact, which is a complete disastrous mess. So
absolutely. And I think both the ACC learned a lot from, the whole Pac-12 debacle, and Florida State specifically learned from seeing how those other schools approached it, the litigation they've had to go through. Mm-hmm. And so they're being very smart with this. And they actually used, both during their meeting and then later on in their lawsuit, they used some of the schools and the media value of some of the schools in the Pac-12 as examples, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
showing that value, showing that media value, and basically how some schools can be harmed depending on what conference they're in and what their media deal is.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the list. I mean, I saw a list of the reasons that they're challenging this grant of rights. 6 main topics. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on them, but the first one is that the grant of rights violates Florida law. The second is unenforceable penalty. The third is a breach of contract. The fourth is a breach of fiduciary duty. The fifth is failure of contractual purpose. And the sixth is unconscionability. That's a tough word. Unconscionability and the violation of public policy. So some of those kind of pretty broad types of legal items. I would say the breach of contract, they get into the details of why FSU feels there was a breach of contract. Certainly gray. There's going to be obviously two differences of opinions on that, probably on all these things. But what I saw, the breach of contract and the breach of fiduciary duty, the ACC is going to have a lot of pushback on, I would assume.
Yeah, and so some of these legal arguments are things that we talked about that we could have seen in the Pac-12 if it would have went all the way out. I mentioned a few times about public schools. So there's kind of a broad legal theory. Neither one of us are lawyers, so if any of our lawyers are out there, you can give us comments, tell us if we mess it up. But there's a broad legal kind of theory or concept of sovereign immunity. Okay.
Yes.
So you have that for countries, nations, but you also have that for states. These are public institutions. So you have this broad concept that we wondered if that was going to come into play in the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, state of California, where in some states, one public entity cannot sue another public entity. But also, so Florida has specific laws on this where basically if a private entity were to sue a branch of the Florida state government, which Florida State University is it's an element, it's a public entity. Basically, if they were to sue and there was some kind of judgment or levies or fines or whatever against them, those will not be paid, and they are basically they're moot unless the Florida state legislature approves them. So that is really a big can of worms. It'll be interesting to see how far they get down on the road with that concept. But in a couple of the things that you talked about, really, they're based on those broad theories of sovereign immunity. But Florida, the state of Florida specifically, has laws that deal with that.
And I would assume Florida State's probably a component unit of the state. Yes. I would assume so.
Yes, it's fully public.
With all the finances going back and forth, control over what they can and can't do, and there's different definitions that you have to meet to be a component unit of another entity. But I would guess that they are. I don't know that for a fact. I could do some research and look it up, but I would assume so.
From what I understand, they're not just like a state related. They are a full public entity.
Right. Okay. All right. So I got a question for you real quick. Yes. I know you want to get into costs and things, but I do want to get your opinion on, do you feel that this whole playoff situation was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, or do you think even outside of that this time, I mean, I think the camel's back was going to break anyway, but is that really what pushed this to happen now?
I think the biggest factor, and we've seen this train coming down the tracks for months and months and months, well before the college football playoff, is the big discrepancy. And they talk about this both in the meeting and in the lawsuit of the ACC revenue share versus what the Big Ten and the SEC is getting and how it's harming those members. So really, I think the catalyst was, the ACC signed this long-term contract with ESPN, and then the SEC went and signed a big contract with ESPN that was like massively over what the ACC got, and now the Big Ten, about a year ago, signed their media deal. So basically, every year, Florida State and Clemson to a certain extent, but Florida State sees itself falling farther and farther behind in that revenue distribution. Which you could just say, okay, well, that's the bed they made, they got to lay in it. Which, if it's me and you, we're a private person, we come up with a contract, then yes, that's just the way it goes. However, with these public entities, there are other things in there. There are fiduciary duties of the commissioner, the board of trustees, because it's a public entity, they have certain fiduciary duties they have to carry out. And so really they saw no choice but to try and protect the financial interest of the university by challenging this grant of rights.
I can understand that, and I think we're going to get further into that point a little bit about the extension of the grant of rights and things. So we'll get back to that here in a minute. But the one thing I do want to say to that is just the contracts matter anymore. I mean, I hear what you just said, but if you sign a contract for a reason and it sounds great at the time and you're willing to do this for 15, 20 years, is that not the risk you're taking at the time?
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, but I work with lawyers often. And every lawyer that I've ever asked about a contract, they say a contract is just the step one they'll say, a contract is written to be broken, and two, they will say the contract is just step one in a settlement negotiation that's going to happen later. So,
step one sounds like something a lawyer would say.
Yes, exactly.
And as a layman and not a lawyer, I go, holy crap, what are you talking about?
Right. But there's so many trap doors in these contracts and bylaws and stuff that's just kind of the way it goes. So do contracts matter? They do, but they're just part of. They're not an end all be all.
And I'm a black and white kind of guy. I don't like 50 Shades of Gray or 2 Shades of Gray.
Right.
I like black and white, and so I struggle with that at times. I understand there's way more gray in the world than there is black and white, but in my little pea brain, I'm a black and white guy, and to me, if it's written and it's a contract and you sign it and you know or should know the risks of it, what are we talking about? But let's move on. Let's move to costs.
Okay.
I want to get the costs. So what do you got for us, Steve?
So first of all, we have a couple charts we want to put up. These were provided both in the Board of Trustees meetings, and then also I think they were included as attachments to the lawsuits.
Okay.
So the first chart that we're gonna show, we're gonna put this up so our viewers can see it, is the trajectory of ACC levied penalty for withdrawing 2010 to 2023. So. So it's all one thing, but there's a spreadsheet in the chart. So you're looking at the spreadsheet right now. This year, this is the cost. This is what Florida State is coming up with. So, it's possible. Who knows how they're figuring this? Accountants and lawyers can do funny things with numbers. Right. Who knows? But this is what they're saying is that if they were to leave right now in 2023, that they would have to pay $572 million. Okay. Now back when in 2013, so it's kind of a little easier to see it on the other chart. So we'll move to the flow chart here just to give a more graphic representation.
Sure. Yep.
But back in 2010, when the first multimedia agreement was signed between ACC and the ESPN, there were no costs at that point. If you left right then, you were good to go. So they signed that contract. Now, and again, if you're looking at this on the chart, we start to see it step up. So in 2012, when the ACC and ESPN amended their contract, the costs went up. Let's see here. Then they went up to $52 million. So not only do we have the severe at the beginning, we had an ACC withdrawal penalty, but now we have an even more severe ACC withdrawal penalty. But here's where it starts to get crazy. 2013, this ACC Grant of Rights starts to kick in. So we go from 21 million to 230 million in 2013. That's an order. That's an order of magnitude greater than it was in 2011. So just in 2 years, you go from $21 million penalty to a $230 million penalty. I mean, just a massive jump. Whoever agreed to that, and that's the question.
That was exactly what I was just going to ask you.
Exactly.
Didn't somebody agree to this?
And that's the thing. And they allege a whole bunch of stuff within the lawsuit. We're not going to get all into it today. Previous, basically, again, some of the same themes that we saw with the PAC.
Yeah.
Gross mismanagement of the conference by previous commissioners, total failure to meet their fiduciary duties and responsibilities. So that was 2013. Here we are 10 years later. Thank goodness we didn't go up a whole nother order of magnitude. However, we did more than double. So now their projection is if they were to leave right now, basically, as they file or before January 1st, they would have to pay $500 million, $572 million, based on the grant of rights that can be, well, we're going to talk about that, but based on the grant of rights that could be extended out to 2036, plus the even more severe ACC withdrawal penalty. So right away, their contention is basically this is such a severe penalty, it doesn't even make sense. And so really they're trying to, before they even say, yes, we're going... there's been some Florida State fans and people on the message boards are like, we'll just raise this money. We got boosters. We're going to throw this money together. We just bought out a coach for, $12 million or $30 million or whatever. we're talking $500 million. If that is, the boosters aren't throwing that money together. It's just not happening.
Right.
And the ACC board or the Florida State Board of Trustees said as much. They said there's no way we can move forward with this until we find out a resolution in court of whether that grant of rights can be enforced and for how long out.
Well, and I think that's the question. The question, I think, is because they can't afford that.
Yeah.
Can we get that number to be reduced?
Right.
And here's the reasons. We went over the 6 challenges to the grant of rights. And if there's any one challenge that they can, find a loophole with, if you will, or a way to get around it, the reality is here they're trying to lower that number to something significantly lower than that. Let me say 2 things on that. Yeah. Number one, if you take what I saw, FSU is expecting, I think this came from the AD, FSU is expecting $42 million annually right now. Not historically, but I think it was this year. They're expecting $42 million annually. That number I would assume is going to grow depending on revenue sharing.
Because of the way
not a lot. Yeah. But, I would assume there's some sort of an inflation factor to that. But let's use the $42 million. Let's multiply that by 13 years throughout. That's $546 million. You just mentioned 572, so you add a bit of inflation. I'm assuming that's where that number is coming from, give or take. So that I think that's probably how that number's being made up. But the other thing I want to say is, you talked about, and I kind of said, well, who approved this? And nobody really knows. I can tell you, being on many boards and seeing how things work. There's often a level of trust with management, with commissioners, with whomever they are, and the board will listen to those commissioners and trust those commissioners until either A, the commissioner does something really stupid so that he can't be trusted anymore, or B, somebody doesn't like the agreement that they actually approved, and this is an assumption. I don't know how this penalty and stuff, I don't know who saw that and how it was agreed to. I would assume it was agreed to by the ACC board, if you will. But and when there's that trust, is everybody reading every piece of that document? You would hope, again, I know how this works is the president isn't, but they're sending it to an attorney or a solicitor or somebody, if they're a big enough organization, they have people in-house that have legal knowledge that they're reviewing that kind of stuff. So, I would think this at the time was probably not something they really even cared about that much, because you're not thinking at the time, again, it gets back to the Pac-12, you're not thinking that you're going to leave. You're not thinking that we're going to disband the ACC. You're happy to be getting all of this money. Yep. So who's going to pay a lot of attention to this sort of thing when life is good and everybody trusts each other and we're a Power 5 program, So there's a lot that can happen and a lot that can be had. And when other people are out getting way more than you, this is what happens. And when you have one or a few schools within a conference, we saw this with the Pac, that are, the breadwinners, so to speak.
Which is Florida State, Clemson. Definitely.
They say, wait a minute. Look at what these other schools are getting. We're just as good as them. I don't want to be tied to these lower tier schools that can't bring in the revenues like we can.
Right.
I want to go with the big boys. Right. And it gets back to that P208. We talk about that all the time. But that's exactly what's going on right now. They want to be part of the Power 2, period. That's it.
Absolutely.
So that's just, a couple takes on that. Yeah. So the other piece that we also learned, kind of one of the last items here, is the ACC now actually filed in North Carolina a charge as well, claiming that FSU explicitly agreed it would not take action against the validity and enforcement of the Grant of Rights. So here we go. Another game just like we had with the Pac, the departing 10 and the staying 2. Here we go. We're off and running.
And this is where you can see that the ACC, they learned from those departing 10, and because that's kind of how we're basically. It's kind of switched where there's a smaller group that's trying to leave and a bigger group that's trying to stay. But they learned from what happened on the Pac, and so they preemptively on Thursday, without announcing, without making a big fanfare, they knew what was going to happen at Florida State's Board of Trustees meeting, and so they preemptively filed in North Carolina, Mecklenburg Superior Court in North Carolina, very friendly court. North Carolina has a lot of different laws We talked about the whole sovereign immunity, but there's other parts of their contract law that's different. It's kind of known that the people in North Carolina, especially supporters of both UNC and NC State, NC State would rather just keep the ACC together, especially the bigger boosters, the older people. So it's a friendly court. Florida State looked for a friendly court near Tallahassee, and the rest of the ACC looked for a friendly court in North Carolina, and it's very smart. And both of them are making arguments as to why they think the jurisdiction should be in one state or the other.
Yeah. And it's interesting that they're doing it at the same time.
Yes.
Again, we're going to go back probably to the PAC case a lot on this, because we covered it really closely, how they played their games, back and forth, what mistakes were probably made on either side, and there's no way these sides haven't learned from that. Well, what mistakes did they make? I think this is only, frankly, going to be even more interesting than the PAC, and we thought that was interesting. Again, being outsiders, we're not fans or alumni or anything of those schools, as we're not with any of these schools that we're talking about here with the ACC. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes down.
The dollar amounts we're talking about, the Pac-12. Small potatoes appetizer, where this is the main course. This is the big one. This is the big enchilada.
Yeah. So Steve, let's wrap it up with, I want to know, what's your guess for a timeline for this to move forward?
Okay. So before we get to that, there was one thing I wanted to bring up. I think we kind of glossed over.
My bad. Okay.
No, it's all right. So let's go back to we talked about Florida State is alleging basic mishandling and misrepresentation by the ACC in their contract negotiation with ESPN. A lot of this goes back to 2016, which is when they really kind of locked stuff down, wanted to strengthen the grant of rights and all that stuff. So what Florida State is alleging is that at that time they were coerced, basically. The ACC lawyers, the ACC people who were negotiating, they negotiated this grant of rights with the ESPN, and they misrepresented what it meant.
Oh, okay.
Basically, that they told everybody that this was going, that both sides, they were extending it to 2027, but that both sides could then possibly agree to go to 2036.
Okay.
However, the Florida State lawyers have been going and they have been analyzing the grant of rights agreement between the ACC and the ESPN, and they were shocked. They say they were shocked to find out that ESPN has a unilateral option to extend that agreement at the previously agreed upon rate. So when they signed this in 2016, it was going all the way out to 2027.
Right.
And now they're finding out, they said they didn't know this before, I guess we'll see, that not only can they go out to 2027, they can extend it to 2036. ESPN can decide to do this with no negotiation whatsoever and keep it at the extended rate, at the current rate, which they're already behind the Big Ten and the SEC.
Right.
So Florida State is saying, we think we could, if we could go back to the negotiating table right now with the ratings that we're getting, wherever, we could earn more money for the entire conference, but we can't even do that because the ACC negotiators misrepresented the agreement to us when we signed it, and they basically totally bungled it and mismanaged it. I mean, how do you sign a contract that one party can extend on a whole nother 9 years and you don't even get any extra money, any extra benefit if they do it?
Right.
So that's part of what they're alleging there. But then also, beyond that, they're saying that the new commissioner, Jim Phillips, when he came in August 2021, that he, so previously, before, they had a deadline of 2021 that they could, that ESPN, by the end of 2021, they had to decide, yes, are we extending this from 27 to 36?
Okay.
So Florida State is alleging that unilaterally by himself, without any approval from a majority of the board, which is required by the bylaws, that Jim Phillips extended that deadline from August 21 to February of 25, or from the end of 21 to February of 25.
Okay.
Basically giving ESPN more time, not giving his own conference more time to do anything, giving them more time to see if they wanted to do this. And he did it on his own, unilaterally, without the approval of 2/3 of the membership. Maybe he talked to a couple schools and got a thumbs up. Who knows? So right now, the contract that they're in is they have no guarantee of any revenue past 2027. So if ESPN in 2025 says, no, we don't want to do this, the ACC has no guarantee of any revenue past 2027. Okay. However, their rights are locked up through 2036. Yes. So ESPN has all the power, has everything in it, and basically what FSU is alleging is the ACC, the commissioner and their lawyers, their negotiators, not only did they act in bad faith towards their members, they didn't uphold their fiduciary duties to get the best deal.
Sure.
So that's what we talk about contracts. Yes, you agree to something, but you're also expecting other members to perform in a certain way, and when they don't perform, then you may have some avenues to challenge it, and that's huge. If the commissioner unilaterally did this without approval, that is massive. And for me, there's no way that you could keep Florida State or anyone that wanted to leave past 2027 if their procedures were not followed correctly.
Well, that's the dagger right there. If what they're claiming is true, is the dagger.
Yeah.
Because originally, the ACC's original signed grant of rights was in 2013 through 2027. That was original. Then it was amended in 2016 that would extend it through 2036.
Gave ESPN the option.
Gave the option. Yeah. So that, in terms of what you're talking about, the piece there, and you hit two big items. Two big items. But the second item to me is the biggest, because the first one I would say, we need the details on it. Yeah. I could easily see, again, as I said before, that could be something that, they actually, FSU and all the members kind of agreed to. You may not have known you did it.
Right.
But if you did, if you were given access to those documents and things and you agreed to it, again, I'm a black and white guy, suck it up, buttercup. But the second piece there, if the commissioner unilaterally acted to extend ESPN's deadline to extend, from what would you say, 2021 to 2025, and that wasn't taken to the board. Woo, that's the dagger.
That's massive.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah. And a lot of what you just said there gets back to the reasons for challenging the grant of rights. Yep. There's breaches of contract, breaches of fiduciary responsibility, failure of contractual purpose. I mean, everything that I said, it's hitting just about every one of those. That is really, really interesting, Steve. So let me get back to my last question. Sorry, I jumped ahead of it there. But where do you think the timeline is for this moving forward? What's your best guess?
So I'm hoping everyone watched our last episode where we really covered this in detail, the reasons of where I thought this was going and why, and we talked about other players that could be joining with Florida State. But the short summary is my best guess on this is there's going to, just like we talked about with the PAC, there's going to eventually be a settlement, okay? You have, shot, counter shot, point, counterpoint, whatever. They're going to go back and forth. And at certain times it's going to look like Florida State has the case. Sometimes it's going to look like ACC has a case. It's going to go back and forth. But eventually there's going to be a settlement. I see Florida State beginning play in the Big Ten in I think 2026, maybe 2027, but it's not going to happen. There's a lot of Florida State people that were watching this board of trustees, and there's some that think that the Florida State's going to be playing in the Big Ten next year, and I'm telling you that ain't going to happen.
No,
I really don't think it's going to happen in 2025. I see the first year possible is 2026. I think that's pretty likely. Could this go to 2027, especially with what we have here with this, the deadline being extended, or even 2028 if 2027 was their last year in the ACC. But I really think sometime in that time frame, 26 through 28, that Florida State will be joining the Big Ten. I know from my Penn State contacts that the Big Ten is interested in Florida State and that there's mutual interest.
Yeah.
We don't know at this point if there's mutual interest from the SEC.
Right.
They want to get into one of them. They want to get into the Big Ten or the SEC. We just don't know if there's any interest in. And here's the thing is that, the SEC is basically in full partnership with ESPN.
Right.
So for the SEC, they're not really going to go banging on Florida State's door right now because, they're basically helping. They're going to be helping Florida State in their battle with ESPN. So, but what I know right now is that the Big Ten is interested in Florida State. Florida State is interested in the Big Ten. And my best guess is we will see them join 26 or 27.
Yeah, and I think for those that say it's going to happen next year, they wouldn't have gone this route.
No.
They would have gone the Pac-12 route.
Yes,
and said, we're announcing and we're going and we'll figure it out after the fact.
Yeah.
They're trying to do it before the fact. The numbers are much, much larger, obviously. So they and that kind of forces them that they have to do it before the fact. But that also leads to the point that until they get answers on some of these things or a settlement on some of these things, they're not going to be doing it. Over $500 million, $500 million.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
It's not going to happen next year. So I kind of like where you're at, especially with what you had said about that extension to 2025, and everything's kind of focusing. It looks like around that 2025 date. So 2 more years in the ACC, and then kind of maybe getting at if they can work all of this out. I would be a betting man to say it's going to get worked out, and I'm with you. I think FSU is out of the ACC for football season 26. Where they're at, I'm not sure, but I think they'll be out as well. So, hey, Steve mentioned our previous episode. We just dropped that a few days ago. I will put a link at the very end of this episode. It'll pop up here. And with that, I want to let you guys know we're going to do another live episode. We're going to do bowl picks. We're doing all the bowls. We're going to be doing that bowl pick episode live, 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, the 27th.
Yeah, I think
27th.
So, right.
Yes, Wednesday the 27th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Come on, you can ask us some questions. We did our first one last week. It was fantastic. Had some subscribers on, did some Q&A, had some bowl picks, gave some stuff away. It was awesome. We're also going to be doing a Pac-12 update. As most of you probably know, there was a settlement between the departing 10 and the 2 that are sticking with the Pac-12, OSU and WSU. We're going to do an update on that. That'll come out here soon as well. And with that, we'll see you guys next time on the Big Mountain.
The Seminoles are on the warpath.